Hello and welcome to Culture Talks. I am Heather, I'm based in the UK and I am one of the regional managers of Crown's Global Skills team. If you have listened to us before, you will have noticed that we are starting to do things a little bit differently, and today is no exception. As International Women's Day for 2025 approached, my co-host Shaila, the regional manager for Asia Pacific, had the opportunity to have a conversation with two of Crown's senior female leaders, sharing stories about culture and women, particularly women in leadership. Two huge topics, two different women with two different approaches to being culturally savvy and using that knowledge to be inclusive in their leadership roles. So before we dive in, we always love to share some stats just to make us look like we've done a bit of research. So let's take a moment to set some context of culture and women in the workplace at Crown worldwide. So founded in Japan 60 years ago, headquartered in Hong Kong, we currently have 76 nationalities within the workforce with the capability of using 46 languages. The top three nationalities are Indian, British and Malaysian. So you'll know that Shaila and I consistently overrepresent the British accent on this podcast. And pertinent to our conversation today, up to 40% of those at management level and above are women. That's not bad. So who better to talk with Shaila than our very own first female CEO, Jennifer Harvey, which was a very exciting coup for us over at Culture Talks, as well as a very visible senior female leader with clients and on social media because of her multiple roles as consulting lead, client advisory board lead, and director of account management in Asia Pacific, Pyett. During the interview, you will hear both women talking about how and when they developed an awareness of culture and of self, their different approaches and different experiences of being women in the workplace, how or even whether it was a consideration for them or whether it was more about others and their consideration. That weaving dance that we all have learnt between, where our cultural norms begin and end and where we do. How to use cultural knowledge to be a good leader, and there's even some unpacking of the learned conditioning that many women have. And as ever, we focus on sharing stories because we know how much when you listen to a story, you hear your own. So to that end, here's a question for you as you listen. Which journey do you most resonate with, either in your own life story or when you look at the women around you? On the one hand, there is the journey of growing up effortlessly absorbed in one culture, then making a conscious choice to go out into the world, of working on finding your voice, overcoming good girl conditioning, navigating how to use that voice at work in maybe culturally appropriate ways. Or, on the other hand, do you resonate with the journey of growing up feeling like an outsider? In this case, a third culture kid, but it could be anything. Using that outsider mentality to sit back at first, be aware and empathetic of when others are different to you, and even harnessing that norm and discomfort of being different, to not write anything off just because it's not been done before, because it might be uncomfortable, but rather having the mentality of thinking, well, why wouldn't I do it? Let's just try, especially when it comes to being a woman in the workforce. So listen to Jennifer and Caitlin talk about their journeys and consider which influences you have had along your journey that bring you to where you are today.
So welcome to both of you. I'd first of all like to start with you both introducing yourself. So Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Okay, I'm Jennifer Harvey. I am the group CEO at Crown. I have lived abroad. I actually consider where I live now abroad, but I was born in Japan. I lived there for 10 years. I then moved to Hong Kong. I finished school in Hong Kong, so 8 more years here. I then went to university in the US. You can hear from my accent that my parents are American. I'm American national. But I, at that point, had never lived in the US. After 4 years of university, my first job was in the US. And after a couple of years working, I decided that I wanted to go back abroad. So I worked for Crown for the first time in Tokyo for a couple of years. Then I moved to Singapore and lived there. And then I met my husband there and we moved back to the US. Even though he's English, so, we're a very mixed up family. He grew up in Africa, so he's a bit unusual like me. And so today I live in New York and I've lived there for a long time. But frankly, I feel like that's my first overseas assignment.
Living in New York.
Living in New York because the American culture is different to what I identify with. And I would say I identify partly with being American, but largely with being Japanese. Yeah. So
And you speak Japanese as well.
I speak Japanese. It's pretty rusty. I'm going to Tokyo tomorrow.
Wow.
So hopefully by the time I leave, you will come back with a fourth.
Practice. Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully that gives some kind of picture of all the mixed up cultures.
Great, thank you. Caitlin.
So I'm Caitlin Pyett. I lead Crown's consulting practice. I lead our client advisory board, and I'm director of account management for APAC. So I'm a UK national, as you can tell from the voice. But I've been in Asia for the past 13 years. So I got a job in Singapore, 13 and a bit years ago. So my husband and I relocated to Singapore. And then his role that he had in Singapore relocated to Hong Kong. So I joined him here in Hong Kong. And I've been here for 8 years now. I also lived in Germany for a year because I did German at university. So that was my year abroad. But other than that, very British upbringing from a very small place in the UK, which I'm still very attached to, go back to often. And I married someone who comes 5 miles down the road from where I was brought up. So, I feel like I've got very strong roots, perhaps a bit different to you, Jennifer, very strong roots, but then I've kind of flown the roots.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. So today we're going to talk about culture, of course, and we're also going to talk a little bit about women in leadership and bring those two really big subjects together. But first of all, I'd like to ask you both, how would you say culture has impacted your life and your journey where you are today? I mean, I think Jennifer, for you, that would probably be quite a big question in terms of being a third culture kid we talk about as well. Third culture adults is something that we've heard you speak about. You want to explain a little bit about that and how that's impacted your journey?
Yeah, it's such a big question, right? It's almost hard to come up with an answer, but I think when you are born outside of your parents' home country, you always feel like an outsider. So from being a little child, even though I was happy, I knew I was different than the people around me. And there's the good and the bad. There's people making a fuss over you because maybe you have lighter hair. But then there's the kids that tease you because they call you some kind of, in Japan, when I was in preschool, I was the only Caucasian in a Japanese preschool, and the boys would call me this name. Anyone who lived in Japan would know this, but Obake no Kyu-chan was like kind of like Casper the Ghost, because I was so white and small, and they just tortured me. And so it wasn't that I was upset when I was 4, but I'm not upset now. It's more that you're different, and I think that has a lasting impact on you because you never assume anything, and you have this sort of empathy of, like, that person may look one way, but what's inside them might be different. And so as to, I don't know that impacts me in leadership, other than I typically don't want to talk first because I want to absorb the environment and try to make sense of it. And I think that it goes way back to the beginning when I was in an environment where I was different.
So your cultural antenna is up, like that's
it's always up. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Caitlin, what about you? What would you say?
So I guess my background's very, very contrasting to yours because, as I said, I came from somewhere that was very English, and when I was growing up in the 70s, my school was all white kids. That wouldn't be that way now in the UK, but then it was very much a culture that I was just sort of born into and effortlessly absorbed. But I always had half an eye on the rest of the world. I was always very interested in other places, in languages. That was the sort of first manifestation of that. I loved doing languages at school. And then as soon as I left school, I went traveling. And I went traveling before university. I went traveling after university. I did a year overseas while I was at university. So, and I think I thought it was just an academic thing at the time, that I liked languages and that kind of stuff. But it's actually an interesting culture. That's what it is. And I look back now and I think, I wish I'd done anthropology at university. I really regret that I didn't do more study into that side of things academically. But I think culture's kind of guided my choices, and the choice to move overseas, it was very much a choice. It didn't happen naturally. I wasn't asked. I sought out the role in Singapore, and made that happen. So it's just been like a fly in my ear, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your role in Singapore, what industry was that in?
So it was within mobility, but I was in an in-house mobility team, but working in an engineering company. Yeah, very different.
Well, that leads nicely to the wider scope of this discussion. It's talking about women and culture and leadership and how they link. So both of you have worked in predominantly sort of male industry, and I guess over the years you've probably come across cultural challenges, or you think you might have faced, or you would have. Do you think it might have been different if you were a male CEO, for example, Jennifer, in that situation in today's world?
I think culture is one of the inputs,
Mm.
and it's not the only input. I remember when I had only worked in the US, even though I grew up in Asia, and I was going to my first professional role. It wasn't a leadership role per se, but it was customer facing role. And I was moving to Tokyo, and I had a lot of people, interestingly, mostly male, say, why would you want to work in Japan as a woman? Right. And it was a long time ago, but not that long ago. And I guess it was a mindset of, well, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
And so I think culture is one thing, but there's also a mindset of what's possible. And some people might write off the possibility before they've even been there or seen it or tried it. Whereas that wasn't where my mind was. And I think it's the same. It is daunting to, it is uncomfortable for me even to say I'm the CEO, right? Because it's such a big job. It's very strange. But
Yeah.
I think it's similar in that you just get on with it.
Yeah.
You could really get tangled up in, it's all men in this conference room, or, everybody else is a man in this environment. It's just a waste of time. You may as well just try. So I think it's like culture is one layer, and then there's just you.
Right. Yeah. And that's embracing it all, right?
I think so, yeah. But having said that, what I find interesting, and this is true even in a leadership role or just as a human being, is that there are cultures you're familiar with, and there are cultures you're not familiar with, and I find that I'm automatically more comfortable in some than others. And it's almost like until you understand what are the elements of culture, whether it be, I don't know the right language, but like sort of time sensitivity or hierarchy, or, those different types of pillars, dimensions of culture, that you almost have to go through a process of understanding your own culture to see why you might visit this country for the first time and feel absolutely at home, and visit another country for the first time and think, I don't belong here. So I think that could be a component of being a woman in leadership. It's also just being a human being in that culture, right? So,
and I think that what you're really like homing in on is what we talk about a lot in cultural training, which is self-awareness, like understanding where you come from. So you feel very comfortable about what your values are, where you come from, and therefore when you're in another culture, you can actually see clearer, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Understanding where you come from is a big thing too, as well. So yeah.
Right, and so I'm based in New York, and we did this exercise internally at Crown where we measured each person measured themselves, and we actually did it virtually, where we had some people in Mexico and some people in the US, and we were having so much fun because, for example, our Mexico manager was finding out how un-Mexican he was. And I know him well, so we were just cracking up, like looking at the dimensions, and I was like, I don't think you're really from there, So it's culture is like one element, and then there's who you are, right? Exactly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, actually. I think it's interesting where culture starts and where you end. And I'm not sure I've kind of got to the bottom of that conundrum. Certainly, I think, from the point of view of being, a senior female person in a company like Crown, for me, I did struggle a bit. And I think it's probably me rather than the cultural thing. But I've often struggled with finding my voice, especially when I was younger, when I was a young woman. I was a very shy child, and I don't think I really worked through that until I was well into my 40s, probably. And I definitely found it challenging to find my voice and to have confidence. I think I always had confidence. I always knew that I was worth something, but to put that out there was something that I struggled with. And I don't know if that's an Englishness in me or if it's just me.
Right.
I really don't know. I can't work through that. I suspect there's an element of culture. I actually had a conversation with my girlfriends at Christmas. We got together and had a night together, talking about the past, and everything. We were talking about where we've gone in life and how we've kind of owned our own paths. And we all agreed that we were kind of brought up to be good girls in a way. And it wasn't something that our parents ever told us. It was just the sort of societal norm in the UK when we were growing up, that you should be a good girl, you shouldn't make waves. And that kind of ties in with not being so vocal. So I think there's a cultural element, but I'm definitely naturally like that anyway. So unpacking all of this stuff in midlife is interesting.
While we were prepping for the podcast, I think you shared an experience of like how culture plays in the workplace, and you were giving me an example of like how you've seen that happen before. Like, do you want to share that?
Yeah, that's got me into trouble. The sort of British tendency to not want to confront things that are negative or unpleasant, or trying to say no to someone. In the UK, we'll tiptoe around that message and we won't necessarily be direct about it because we don't want to offend, and we just like things to be nice and harmonious. You don't want to make a scene. It's a very English thing, but I know that sometimes that can land very badly in some cultures because they could potentially think that you're being dishonest or disingenuous.
Yeah.
And it really isn't that at all. But I've definitely experienced times where I haven't delivered a message as directly as I perhaps should have done, and then been called out for it. And it's hard not to take offence because I didn't mean it like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one of those cultural things that.
Yeah.
I think one way that being either anyone in a leadership position, but certainly including women in leadership positions, it's really important that you understand the cultural elements of your team or where you're working, because any person in a leadership position wants to be able to positively communicate with people, or productively is a better word. Productively, you're trying to get a team to achieve something or be engaged or whatever your desired outcome is. And you're only going to be able to do that if you communicate effectively. And probably you're only going to communicate effectively if you understand these nuances, that somebody, that you might say something or behave a certain way and offend someone or confuse someone because you didn't understand. I know that, it's kind of like what you're describing. I've been on the receiving end of it. When I was working in Singapore, I had just strange things said to me, and I thought, why do they keep saying that? And then later I would find out, like, I'll give an example that I was constantly asked at work, have you eaten? Have you eaten?
Yeah,
have you eaten? And I thought, I don't know, I was getting paranoid. Like, why is everybody asking me, like, what, do I not look well? But actually, that's more like a greeting. This food's such an important part of the culture that it's almost like hello or are you well, right? So it's little things like that you could invent a meaning in your mind that actually hurts your relationships in some way. And you could do that yourself by saying things in a way that does not very well received. And so I think anyone in leadership, including women, you really benefit from understanding the culture of wherever you're trying to work. I would imagine you guys have also experienced in your working lives around the world is that we have to also make sure we don't bring preconceived things to the table. Because I remember I hired somebody in one of the locations I was that had a certain religious background, and I made assumptions about what they would or wouldn't want to do. And this person went so far in the company because they were not going to have, their own culture really made distinctions between men and women, but they were not following those rules. They were their own person, and they did amazing things, and they worked in different countries for Crown, actually. And when I hired them, it's my own misconception.
Right.
I wouldn't have foreseen it. I could see that they had a lot of talent and they were very smart, but it just goes to show that we can inadvertently perpetuate some of those preconceptions, even as women.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to be careful you don't play a role in that and be conscious.
Yeah.
So culture is only a barrier maybe if you let it be.
Yeah. I see what you mean, to make those preconceptions, those stereotypes as well. Like, yeah.
Because everyone's got the ability to be, prejudiced, haven't they, or to have bias. I mean, everyone has
bias.
We all know that. I think one of the best things I would say that you gain when you do go and live in a culture that is not your own is exactly that. It's just having your eyes open all the time and not learning just how to I was going to say process things. It's not really that. It's just learning that people are people wherever you are, and there might be this overlaying element of culture where things at first appear strange or responses appear strange, but as soon as you understand that people are people everywhere.
Yeah.
And it might be that the diversity doesn't even come from the places you expect. It's diverse, but not in the way you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
Right. The prejudices, as you said, stereotypes. And it's always kind of like delightful to see that you're wrong. Oh, I didn't think that person would come out with that, solution, but that's brilliant, So, I think, it's a mix. That's the other thing about being a third culture kid, right? Is that that you can't be pigeonholed. That's what a third culture is. It's your own culture, a mix of where you're from and where your family comes from. And because you can't be pigeonholed, you shouldn't pigeonhole others.
Yeah.
We
all have our strengths and weaknesses no matter what culture we come from.
So there we go. Jennifer Harvey, Crown's CEO, and Caitlin Pyett talking about culture and women in leadership. I hope you agree how refreshing it is to hear senior leaders talking openly about their journeys and what's impacted them, what's important to them. As you heard both women say, there are so many aspects and influences that weave together to differing extents in different journeys. Cultural awareness and being a woman are just two of many. What I thought was so interesting, though, is that both women shared really vulnerably about what makes them uncomfortable, whether it's a big job title or finding your voice. Both of those could be culturally related or being a woman. But what both women talked about was then how they used that knowledge and experience and learnt from that to try and harness the information they got from that to be better leaders, better in the workforce, and, more, as Jennifer put it so well, productive communicators, which is so vital as a senior leader. And which journey did you resonate most with? Or were you somewhere in between? Was it Jennifer's? Was it Caitlin's? For me, I definitely fell somewhere in between. I resonated with elements of both. I'm a third culture kid with that outsider awareness. And then I moved back to the UK when I was still a child, and I went full good girl to try and fit in as best as I could because that discomfort for me was too much. And now I'm unlearning it as I navigate my 40s. So I definitely resonated with both. As we end, we would normally leave you with a question, but actually this time we want to leave you with the words of Crown CEO Jennifer. She talked about the mindset of focusing on what was possible when she was talking with Shaila, of not overthinking and of just doing it. And she finished that conversation reflecting on her hopes for women, particularly those who think they shouldn't do a job just because they are a woman. Before I go, a big thank you to Jennifer and to Caitlin for sitting down and talking with us. Thank you for listening. I hope you join us again for another episode of Culture Talks. Here's Jennifer.
So I'm an avid runner, right? And sometimes before I go for a run, I get, anxious about is this going to be hard? It's going to hurt. I'm not fit enough to do what I'm setting out to do. And especially when I used to do it after work, I'd get home and I would just get all anxious about the run I wanted to do. And so sometimes I wouldn't do it. And I learned, like, if I stop thinking so much and just go and do it, I'll either do it or I won't do it. Just go.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same for women who are embarking on any kind of role that intimidates them. Stop thinking, just go, you know, and
Just
I
go
love
for it. Yeah.
sorry, running analogy. But I think it's true. Like, you know, any job where you think I can't do it, or I'm not really sure, I haven't done that before, just stop thinking, just do your best, you know.
And what's the worst that can happen even if you don't do it? Even if you, as long as you try, even if you fail, then it's a learning experience, isn't it?
You learn way more from
Yeah.
the challenging endeavors,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's a failure or subpar, you learn way more from that. So there's really no downside. And anyway, that don't even think about it, just go.
Yeah.